right, guys. So, welcome back to the drawing table where we have chill and casual conversations about art and, of course, about creating it as well. We are your hosts, Ken Darmadi, and
And
also,
Jourdan Tuffan.
and today is our fourth episode. And as we said, it's been a while since our last episode with Axel.
Yeah,
And
that
yeah,
was a really exciting one.
mhm.
Yeah, we've been actually really looking forward to getting back into doing another podcast straight after it. But
Mhm.
I think we owe you guys a little bit of an explanation of where we have been for the last few weeks. So, not long after finishing the podcast with Axel, I actually headed back to Jakarta to have a holiday, to visit family and friends, and of course meet up with Ken and just take a little break from work and everything. So that has been really great. And Ken and I actually met up. We met up at his house, and we even had or at least I had a sleepover there, and yeah, we just had a lot of great fun together doing stuff like karaoke, and even
We
just
got
this.
drunk.
Well, I mean, I was fine, Ken, but you were
I
the
was fine.
one. You were the
I
one
wasn't.
like nearly passed out on the couch.
I wasn't drunk though.
Well, whatever the case is, you were out cold pretty quickly.
Yeah, pretty soon.
But I guess drinking alcohol and playing DDR straight afterwards isn't exactly the best idea.
Yeah, just don't do that at home, guys.
Yeah, you've been
Especially
warned.
after you ate a lot of food and then you drank alcohol and then you play DDR. That's not a good combination.
Cooked by yours truly. Well, and my wife, of course. So yeah,
Yeah.
that was really great. And you know what? When it was at the end of the holiday, I was just so pumped to get back into everything, even just doing another podcast, maybe even the week that I got back. But as fate would have it, I actually got sick almost exactly on the same day that I flew back to Newcastle. So that's been really unfortunate. And that took me out of commission for around a week and a half. And it's only been this week where I've gotten back into routine and prepared for a podcast.
Yeah. And as for myself, it's actually been quite a tough month last month because my grandma had a sickness, some sort of like an early stage of stroke, and then things got worse, and yeah, it was basically a difficult month for me, and I guess for Jordan since he also got sick.
Yeah, well, it's a different kind of difficulty, but I think the bottom line is you can never really predict sometimes what and when things would happen. But
But yeah,
with that aside, we're both really excited to actually be back and doing the podcast again. And yes, Buri Thor, things certainly got well in Jakarta, and it was a lot of fun. So, you know what? We're pumped up and ready to get back into the swing of things. And what we want to do today actually is something a little bit different. As you probably know, during our first podcast, our very first pilot podcast, we we started on a design which was based on three randomly generated keywords. So they were survivor, dealer, and merchant. And Ken and I decided to do, in a way, a let's design series of sorts where we would do the designing on stream and do our own takes of it and see how each of us would interpret it in our own unique way. And just for a quick refresher, actually, let me flip over to my Photoshop. Well, I kind of spoiled it with the final image, but let's take it all the way back. So this is the mind map that I had, and well, without really having to go back into it, the idea that I ended up going with personally was a tribe of people or village of people that had survived an attack or a stampede by carnivorous and giant reptiles, and they fought back, and upon killing these giant creatures, they use the remains of these creatures, the skeletal remains, to fashion architecture out of them. So that's where the merchant and dealer part comes in. And I had the idea of maybe them creating a shop from those remains. And these are some of the rough sketches that I had come up with from that idea. So I had experimented with different parts of the skeleton and different materials, so such as wood and reeds, I guess, to tie everything together, and also some hides to provide some shelter. And yeah, I came up with a few rather interesting shapes. And some of them weren't quite as successful, but in the end, I decided to move forward with this one actually. So it's more of a. So the idea is that there's two giant crocodile-like skulls that are at on the left and right wings of the building, and you walk up to the main entranceway, which is propped up by two giant tusks.
Yeah, I'm glad you picked that one because I think it's one of the more successful ones that you did.
Oh, that's good to know. But funnily enough, Ken, like when we were working on it, on another stream as well, I was actually getting quite frustrated with it to the point that I really just didn't want to move forward with it. But I think, holiday definitely helps just for you to refresh your mind and come back to it fresh. So, what Ken and I have done actually for this podcast is instead of drawing, or finishing the design live, we wanted to actually do it pre-recorded for a few different reasons. I mean, I think from our experience, Ken, it has been a bit difficult, hasn't it, to try and talk with the
Right.
audience and have a conversation while actually doing proper design thinking.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's definitely something that you have to experience to understand how difficult it is.
Yeah,
Because
I mean, it's
we kind of underestimated how difficult it is.
yeah. I mean, we had this idea in mind that we're gonna have such a great interaction with the audience while coming up with these cool designs.
Yeah.
But no, it's just trying to ride a unicycle while juggling bowling pins, and that just didn't work out. So we wanted. Oh, hey Evan, good to have you on
Hello,
the stream
Evan.
with us this time, man. But yeah, we just wanted to take a little bit of that difficulty out and pre-record it. And considering that the finishing process takes many hours, we wouldn't wanted to try and condense it so you guys just get to see the whole process without us boring you to death, I suppose. So yes, I'll be starting off with the design. So what we'll be doing is that we'll be having a conversation of sorts where, as I go through the designs and explain certain parts of the thought process, Ken would also be asking me questions or making comments as well. And of course, since this is the drawing table, we're inviting you people in the chat to also join in as well. So if you have any comments, questions, or things that you want clarified, please feel free to let us know at any time, and we will do our best to answer it.
And if you guys don't have any questions or are too shy to ask in the middle of our conversation, we also have a Q&A session at the end, so you can
Yes.
have your question by then. So
Yeah, and you'll also be able to ask more, unrelated questions then as well. So save that for later, but while we're showing the time lapse, feel free to ask anything about the process itself. So without further ado, let me actually change the stream source to VLC player.
I'm
And
gonna solo you.
okay, hopefully there's none of that weird problem. Oh, great, perfectly fine. So I kind of cheated a little bit where I where I did a little bit of refining of this sketch before recording it, so that was my bad. But as you can see, I did try to add a few more points of interest because the initial silhouette was a little bit plain, where on the sides, especially at the bottom of the stilts, there wasn't much stuff going on. Oops, my bad. Let me just play the video and you guys can see the process. There we go. So at this stage, I'm just trying to refine the details and trying to bring a lot more interest, because I did have a relatively solid silhouette going on, and I just wanted to make it more believable for myself and just bridge that gap between the rough sketch and the finish.
And it's actually so cool seeing the time lapse.
Oh yeah. For sure. Even if it is my own drawing, I'm not afraid to say that. But as you can see, I'm also at this stage just trying to work out how the different bone parts can act as different functions for the building. So maybe the tusks can come out forward and create a place where there would be shelter for the people coming in. And yeah, it's this skip part. Skipped a little bit forward, and at this stage of the video, actually, I'll pause it quickly. It jumped forward quite a bit, but all that I really did was actually add in a little bit of wash just to extract the silhouette a bit. But at this stage, I've quickly realized that, hang on, the brief was survivor, merchant, and dealer, and I went a little bit too crazy in adding in a pier or a small jetty at the bottom where fishermen would go out and hunt these magnificent beasts, and having these stairs just to create interest in elevation. I mean, that's cool and all, but it looks more like a chieftain's hut to me in the end. What do you think, Ken?
Yeah, it does. I think it looks very menacing, I guess. Like,
Yeah,
there's so many spikes. Instead of inviting, it just looks very aggressive, you know.
Yeah. Oh, and Titandar as well has asked in the chat, at this stage, do you already think about the values of the different elements in the design? Are you talking about as in the brightness values or something else, Titandar? But otherwise, if you're talking about the brightness, I am sort of thinking about it. And the way that I do think about it is that I actually think about the materials, whereas the bones are lighter value, and I'm thinking that the hide of the crocodile is a bit darker. So I kind of try and balance it out, and perhaps areas of accents would be the tarp, maybe like red cloth that is draping over to form a tent. And so yeah, hopefully that answers your question. So in order to address the problem that I mentioned earlier, I decided to just peel it back a little bit more, where I just slice off the bottom stilts, which makes it a little bit more complex and also feel a little bit more grand into just the upper area. So I'm at this point just starting off with the skull, just drawing in basic shapes to get the approximate forms in perspective. And as you can see, I also drew like a bounding box of sorts outside to give me a rough guide on perspective and the dimensions of the building without overwhelming my canvas with too many perspective lines.
Is there any reason why you didn't do it in 3D? I mean, blocking it in 3D.
Well, I think for this piece, as you can see, there's a lot of organic shapes going on, and I think it would have been a little bit difficult to try and do all of it in 3D, as I'm not that experienced yet, and I'm sure that there's some programs that would do a great job of it, but yeah, I just focused on trying to get the whimsicality and the flow of the shapes, which these organic ones lend themselves very well towards. So at this stage as well, after getting all of the basic forms and structures down, I've decided to add in some of the more minor details. So I thought, what are some of the ways that I could actually make the place feel a little bit more human lived in, or has a human touch to it? So I thought about adding bone carvings perhaps on the entrance, so that adds extra detail density and interest to that area. which draws more of the attention there. And I'm also, as you can see, adding in some chips and wears and tears into the skeletons and also the cloth, just to make it feel like, you know, they've gone through battles and war with the animals. And it's not necessarily a place that's cozy, but these survivors have made do with. And I also added in some small furniture, thinking about some of the ways the merchants could have displayed some of the goods as well.
It's really nice touch with the carvings. I really like the carvings on the entrance.
Oh,
See,
thanks a lot.
it adds so much personality to the structure, instead of having it like just like a regular bone.
You know, the funny thing is, you're the third person to mention it, because I was so close to actually taking it out because it felt so noisy. But after two of my coworkers said, "Hey, it looks pretty good. It looks good," so I was like, "Okay, fine. I won't remove it." And so reading some of the comments from the chat, Jourdan Bima says Jourdan doesn't need 3D. 3D needs Jourdan. Well, I wouldn't say that, but I try to fake it to make it more convincing. And Justin says, or Conway Art says, "What's your diet like to pump out this much art juice?"
I'm curious.
Well, I think in this case, I just wanted to try out something a little bit different, because a lot of the architecture pieces that I've done have been quite medieval, you know, hard surface, and like lots of 90-degree, 45-degree, like clean edges. And I wanted to just experiment a bit. So what I've been doing recently actually is going on Pinterest and just sketching out whatever I find interesting. And I decided to venture a bit more into organic shapes, such as Art Nouveau architecture and even tribal huts and nature. So there's a lot of inspiration there. So that's one of the things that I actually do in order to build up the visual library, in order to produce some newer designs. So if that answers, well, I wouldn't necessarily say, but yeah, answers the question. And Errol says as well, "I love these sketches, so much thinking and design decision." Oh, thanks a lot, Errol. Oh, real life diet.
I was gonna say that your answer was too serious.
Oh, so that's what you meant. I don't know. I've been eating a lot of summer rolls lately, so that's been good, and a lot of chocolate biscuits too.
Maybe next time you can show your recipe for the summer rolls.
Maybe I'll actually make, you know, like, maybe we should make like the cooking table podcast.
Cooking table.
Maybe that's an idea. If there's enough interest out there in the chat, maybe.
Stream as we cook and eat.
Yeah, mukbang channel.
Yeah, mukbang. That's what I said.
Yeah. So that we don't drift off too much in the topic. So I decided to do at this stage, before going into final line work, is trying out something a bit different, where I'm coloring in my rougher line work, and the way that I'm doing it is lightening up my layers, which I've merged together with a mask, and applied the colors using multiply, and applying the lighting on separate layers. So I initially add the shadows first, and then the lighting layer, and then the AO layer. And I did it with the usage of curves, which was shown to me by one of my coworkers actually, Morton. And it's been a huge life changer in terms of controlling the lighting. And unfortunately, OBS didn't capture the way that I adjusted the curves, but I'll be more than happy to cover it sometime, or maybe later on during the podcast if we have more time. So at this stage, after doing the rough colors, I've decided to just slap on a white color background on top of everything and lowering the opacity, and using a blue line just to add in all the smaller details. So things in the shop such as pots, pans, and lots of bags hanging around, which have been crafted, and even animal hides as well. So just to reinforce that feeling that they've hunted for and fought for their survival. And right now, at this stage, after doing the rough line over, I decided to lower the opacity of that too and just go over everything with simple line work. And it's nothing special too. It's just an elliptical brush which is on 100% hardness settings.
So the previous one wasn't the final line art?
No, it was just
Okay.
it was just a rough one actually.
I
And
see.
it's not really my typical process, but I decided to try something new.
Errol
Uh,
asks, how long do these concepts usually take from initial sketch until the finished piece?
If you're talking about the initial sketches, as you can see, my sketches are not the most beautiful ones, unlike Ken's. So I usually take around 2-3 hours for rough sketches. Let's just say for around 5 thumbnails of base ideas. And this whole thing, bringing it into a finish, actually took about 10 hours altogether, with some crashes in between. And also me alt tabbing, so more or less 10 hours I would say to bring it to a finish. So at this stage I'm just focusing on going over the details and just fleshing out some of the textures even more as well.
You might show this later, but I'm gonna ask it now. Are you gonna be reusing the rough to the rough painting and the rough line art as like a base for the clean piece, the clean image?
That is a very good question actually. I tried to. You'll see that soon.
Okay.
But I realized that it got a little bit messy, so I reused the curves and the base layers, but I didn't just directly use the flat layers or
Okay.
the flattened color layers, if that makes sense.
So the flat color layers are redone basically.
Yeah, I just used the flat and the curves, and I just reused that and refined it a bit before
Okay.
continuing.
I see.
Yeah. So at this stage, after doing like the bigger shapes, I'm just going in and applying more textures. And after doing all of that, I try to outline groups of different elements in the pictures to create a sense of depth. Like for example, at this part of the image, as you can see, I'm kind of circling around those groups of bags and hides rather than doing it for every single little element, because if I did that, it would kind of overwhelm the image with heavy lines, whereas this one adds a little bit more isolation of sorts, or it delineates some of the elements from the things in the background.
It's really
And
nice.
thanks, Ken. And well, to be more transparent about it as well, I've been looking at an artist quite a bit recently, and not just recently, for a while. And his name is Oscar Cafaro, which I can bring up sometime, or add on as a reference image later. But he does this line work style while he starts off with thinner line works of just the whole image, and it seems like he does this thickening of lines in the end, which I think is a structured way of approaching it, because sometimes when I do the AO and thickening of lines from the start, I kind of overdo it in certain areas, and it ends up becoming a bit too dark or a bit too thick. So at least this way, when I separate it into different steps, where I start with initial line work, then AO, and also thickening different groups of elements, then it becomes a lot more manageable to me.
Do you think it influences your traditional sketching as well?
Interesting. Wait, sorry, what?
Do you think this method also influences how you do things traditionally as well?
Somewhat. Although traditionally, I'm not one to really take my time with my sketches, so I somewhat do it, but it's really quite messy. And there's a few comments in the chat. I hope I'm not late, says Latte Milky. And no, you're not. You're still quite early, so it's good to have you here.
Oh,
And
hello, Latte.
And Conway Art also asks, is there any techniques that you've used in the past and have now cut out and replaced with quicker methods? I will say for this kind of line work stuff, it's, I think, relatively straightforward with, line weight and with also texturing and things like that. But I've experimented more with how I start off my ideation phase. So back then, I might have tried a lot more with maybe painting, but lately I've just been experimenting more with photo bashing, and even in terms of painting, just a different workflow where I start with silhouettes first, or where I start with rougher line work first. So it's a bit of a mix. So for this specific kind of artwork I do, it hasn't changed much. It's just that I think I've been a little bit more efficient with my layer management, and also maybe different techniques on how to achieve the same thing, such as me using curves instead of multiply, for example, to introduce shadows and lighting. Bima asks as well, how many hours you took for this line arting process? For the line art itself, it wasn't too long. I would say 3 hours, 5 hours. It's a bit of a back and forth, as you can see. And just to kind of address what Ken said as well, this is the stage where I kind of merged down my previous colors and tried to paint it. And I tried to be a bit more fancy with the textures. And I felt like it got a little bit too noisy in the end. And as you can see later, I've discarded it actually and started out afresh. And Errol asks as well, I love that approach to line work, just like going from big, medium, small, yes? Yes, definitely. Even when it comes to just doing the thinner line work, I think approaching it from the bigger shapes, such as the skull, and then the bigger bone shapes before going to the textures, and then adding line weight, is in a way like an approach of big, medium, and small. And no, it's not one of the concepts for Borderlands 3, Bima. I haven't played it. I haven't played any Borderlands games myself, actually. Let me just take a nibble of my biscuit. Do you have any comments, Ken? Any
No, I'm just
feedback?
mesmerized. No, it's really cool seeing the time lapse and seeing how you work, because to be quite honest, we've never really seen each other's workflow previously.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you think about it, right? It's weird.
Yeah, no, it's true.
The only time that I've seen you work was actually at FZD.
Huh?
When you were doing that like a dungeon thing with like a gargoyle, like the dragon gargoyle.
Yeah, I remember that. Oh man, I felt cool back then too. I was like, a classman from underneath me is talking to me and asking me, not asking me, or like watching me work. Oh, I'll show him. I mean, maybe not like that, but but yeah, we've never actually done it, and I'm actually really looking forward to seeing your process as well, as it's evolved quite a bit recently.
Yeah, it's true. But yeah, I can show that later. It will be like half in 3D and half in Photoshop, but that's a talk for later.
Yeah.
And Winnie says, nice progress so far, quite motivational for me to do my CGMA homework.
Oh, that's great to hear, Winnie. Very happy to hear that. And a big hello as well to all the people that have just joined us as well, because we see an increased number of viewers as well. So awesome. Even if you're just a silent viewer, it's okay. We appreciate having you here. Oh, and so to get back to the piece and not to ramble on too long. So after redoing the baseline work as well and cleaning up the masks for the materials, which I think is important, because with clean material masks, as a base, I'm able to just magic wand them and use them as selection layers as in a way, so that I don't always have to constantly lasso or make redo the selection as well every time.
Nice
That
trick.
gets really tiring. Yeah, thanks, Ken. I think I did learn it from you. But at this stage, uh, just to catch up a bit, I'm adding in a little bit more details. And I actually got feedback from one of my coworkers, Quentin, actually, and he was suggesting that the piece was lacking a little bit in the dealer aspect, because the merchant aspect might have been more obvious, but I wanted it to be a little bit more illicit, you know, like dealers of weapons or drugs. And I've also started watching Breaking Bad recently, so maybe I'm a little bit of that mindset right now. And I know what some of you guys are doing in the audience, rolling your eyes. Is he only watching Breaking Bad now? Yes. but but moving on.
I've
so
never
I
actually seen it.
Okay, so at least I'm one step ahead of you in that way.
Yeah.
So I decided to add in some plants hanging in some of those pillars, or not pillars, but support beams in the middle. And I felt like it was just such a prime location to hang it. And on the left wing as well, you can see it's more like bags, pots and pans, and animal hides. But if you look at the inside and on the right side, it's more of like the drugs. So you kind of have like two different windows. So maybe there's two different shopkeepers occupying the same place.
Maybe they're brothers.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that could be it.
But yeah, I think that was a really good point about the dealer aspect.
Yeah.
I think that didn't really show through in my piece.
Um,
But yeah. Also, I was gonna say you have really nice colors in this one.
Thanks, Ken.
Really love the final result, but yeah.
Yeah.
I
I'll
wonder how
definitely-
you approach the colors in this one. Maybe you can talk more about it.
Yeah, sure. Just gonna quickly address some of the comments in the chat, and there's Blueberry Star. So good to see you here, Jess. And Morton as well. Welcome, dude. Actually, was talking a little bit about you earlier on when I was talking about the curves technique that you showed me. And thanks a lot, Jess. And so to address what you were asking earlier, Ken, is that I actually decided to do the colors quite simply this time, because as I've told you earlier, I kind of skipped ahead, or at least I tried to do a little bit extra textures in the piece or in the coloring, that it ended up overwhelming the line work. So one of my main mindsets coming into this piece was to keep it simple, or at least the colors, the interior details simple. And I think what really helped is just isolating the light, the shadow, and the AO layers, which allow me to individually control the lighting and the values to match some of the references that I've had.
Nice.
And I tried to also keep the colors quite saturated and in a way more cheerful. That's more suitable for a stylized world too, because it's easy for me to go overboard sometimes with the details, that I end up diluting the important details of the piece. So I tried to focus on exaggerating the bounce light even in the structure itself, so it feels like they're in a hot desert perhaps, or the sun is beating down on them and a lot of the light is just bouncing inside and creating that warmth to the piece.
Really love it, man. It looks really nice.
Thanks, Ken. Really appreciate it. And I
Oh,
also
and-
try to exaggerate the ambient light as well, as you can see. So some of the cools are quite apparent and exaggerated.
Yeah. And also, Latte asked for line weight. Do you usually apply it to show which one is closer to the eyes, or
Oh.
camera first? To the eyes or camera first?
I'll be honest. For this kind of piece, I don't think of it too much. Only to a certain extent. I just think more in focal point and non-focal point. But when I think about a full environment, for example, that's when I really start thinking more about that. Because at this stage, it might not be too necessary. And we're actually approaching the end of the piece, which is, well, quite fast. But as you can see, a while back, I'll just rewind a bit actually. I don't think it's too much time. But I've actually gone over after applying all of the curves layers and painted over things and cleaning things up, and I decided to add just the glow that where the light is hitting, just to make it feel like there's atmosphere. And as you can see at this stage, I'm kind of doing it on the highlighted areas, just to make it feel like it is in a living and breathing world and not just on a studio table. And I kind of skipped forward a little bit here and to the to the final image, but I as a final touch, I actually went over to my line work, which is set on a multiply, and I grabbed lighter colors in certain areas and just dabbed it on, just to tone down the line work in certain areas, such as the non-focal point. And the focal point areas, I keep it a bit darker. And that also helps make it feel like there's a lot of light bouncing around as well. And just adding post-processing, such as camera raw filter, overlay, just trying to make it as colorful as possible this time.
Oh, do you want to upload that on ArtStation so our viewers can see it?
Oh shoot, I actually forgot about doing that. But what I will do after the podcast is upload it onto ArtStation. So if any of you are interested in seeing the high-res image, feel free to do so later on and browse at your own.
You should do it now.
Or I can do it while you're talking, Ken. So I don't interrupt the flow. But yeah.
Maybe you can answer some questions first from Errol.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Errol.
And then we can go to ours.
Okay, so Errol says, speaking of colors, did you approach it as a step-by-step, local colors, ambient colors, bounce, etc., or just go a la prima and go paint it intuitively? Definitely not the latter. It's not necessarily my kind of style to do it. I'm not that confident with my painting. So as I mentioned before, I did break it down and separated each lighting component into different layers to make it a lot more manageable and non-destructive for me. So if I wanted to retouch up the lighting or change the shape of the lighting, it'll be much easier for me to do so that way. But yeah, I mean, sometimes I do it a little bit more a la prima, but in this case, I try to keep it more cel shady in a way. And thanks a lot, Latte Milky. I really appreciate that. I definitely pushed myself to make it feel a lot more 3D in a way with minimal rendering, because yeah, it's just too laborious for me otherwise. But yeah, this wraps up my piece, guys. So hopefully you all got something out of it. And if you have any further questions, you can always ask them in the Q&A session later on. And Ken, do you have any final comments?
Just looks awesome. Don't really have any more comments.
And hey, Mango, great to have you in the stream with us, man.
Hello, me. And yeah,
and
I was
thanks
say,
a lot, dude.
Yeah, that looking at the process really tempts me to do something that's more stylized and more line work focused.
You should, man. You've got good stuff. I mean, good line work. But so we keep this a little bit more open, or at least more constructive. Do you have any feedback, perhaps, on what I could improve on? And this goes for the chat as well. If you have any comments on that, feel free to toss it at me, because you know we're all here to learn, and we're definitely no exceptions to that as well.
I think my only feedback would be, well, the only one that I can think of at the moment would be adding just a bit of ground, which I think I saw you almost did it.
Yeah.
You didn't, because right now it just looks a bit unfinished in terms of presentation.
So this.
So if yeah, so that's so if you add just a bit of ground, I think it would really like ground the architecture to the environment. Because if I look at the architecture itself with the blooms and also like the light bloom
Mm-hmm.
and the blue light hitting it. I think it
Mm-hmm.
really helps it make it feel
Mm.
like it's in some sort of environment. So it's kind of a waste to have it just floating on a canvas.
Mm. I see, I see. Yeah, that makes sense. I can do it. I can definitely apply that feedback. So add some ground. I'll just write it down. And there's
It's
a
a quick feedback.
And hey, Stellar, how great to have you. And Burrito also comments, I really tend to be very lazy about doing a clean line art, but this is motivating me to push myself more. And definitely, I'm quite lazy myself, and I was tempted to just keep it quite rough. But I view line work as like a solid base. And if the base is solid, whatever you add on top to it, it'll be able to hold more weight. And you can always fall back on it if all else fails. And Mangami asks as well, I'm curious, do you make line art revision edit when you're coloring this? I actually do. I did do it at some points where I tried to add in more details, such as replacing the items on the right hand side of the building with plants. So it's a back and forth process. I don't think it's something that that we should be so locked in terms of, oh, if I do line work, that means I have to move on to color and never go back. Just do whatever is needed, I think. Doing whatever is needed to achieve the best result is the way that I'd approach it. And Conway Art as well says, maybe the cool light could be desaturated, maybe a little bit warmer. I'll try that out and see how it looks like. Although I will personally say the exaggerated light does make it feel like, Super Smash Brothers trophy kind of thing. And it has quite a nice feel to it. But I'll give it a shot and see how it looks like. And I appreciate the comment. And what's your... you know what, Ken? You can start booting up your piece if you're ready. And
Oh, sure.
I'll just answer a few of these questions first. So Bima also says, what's your tip to people that feel tedious and boring when doing line art? I think that's a difficult thing to say. Because when you're talking about line art, it comes down to preference as well. There's some people that just can't stand it and only do very simple line work. And they just move on to painting. And if it really is that tedious for you, maybe there's not too much I can say or do to change that. It's just best to think of it as what kind of look do you want to achieve and what do you enjoy. And if you have that in mind, just do whatever you think looks best and you enjoy the most. But on a more technical side of things, I do believe good line work is a foundation to better painting as well. And that seems to be the case with a lot of good painters I know. So, yeah, it's good practice. And Blueberry Star also says, your structure inspires me to consider shapes more. I'll remember your works as I do my work. Thank you, Jordan. And no worries, Jess. Glad to hear that. Yeah.
By the way, I think we have that bug that we had early on.
Yeah, I know. I'll pop out of the screen and give Ken a way for his piece very soon. So I'll just quickly wrap up these few questions and I'll try and respond to them. Actually, yeah, I'll just respond to them quickly and we'll move on to Ken's piece. So, whenever I do line art, when I color it, I just couldn't resist not to edit the line art when the shading is not working. Oh, definitely. I have that temptation too. And yeah, if you view your line work as a base, it makes sense to do it. And Evan also says, how do you make your decisions on proportions when designing? That one I can go more in depth on later. So I think I'll just leave it for the Q&A session if you don't mind, Evan. And I'll write it down and we'll move on to Ken's piece so that I don't take over the podcast.
Yeah.
So I will let Ken solo his stream.
I'm not sure how we're gonna do it. Your screen is overpowering my screen.
Yeah, that is a problem.
Well, what fixed it just now was restarting the stream.
Do you want to do it really quickly? Hopefully you guys don't mind actually us restarting the stream, so we can see Ken's artwork in all its glory. So you can think of it as a small break. So we'll be back in around a few seconds or a minute or so. So hang tight, everyone.
Yeah, we'll be back. Stay tuned.